From the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Peggy Pearlstein, head of the Hebraic section here in the African and Middle Eastern Division of the Library of Congress. Welcome to today's program, a talk by Irvin Ungar on the fabric of America through the art of Arthur Szyk, co-sponsored with the Prints and Photographs Division of the Library of Congress. I'd like to ask Dr. Sarah Willett Duke, curator, popular and applied graphic art, to come talk on behalf of the Prints and Photographs Division.
Thank you, Peggy. Welcome, everybody. Peggy asked me to say a few words about the Prints and Photographs Division, and I want you to all know that I have brought 3 Arthur Szyk originals that are very key for this election day, a Declaration of Independence, a Bill of Rights, and the 4 Freedoms. And those will be on display after the talk, and you're welcome to come back. Peggy kindly brought out a magnifying glass, and that's the best way to see the work of Arthur Szyk, because he used a single hair sabled brush in creating his art, and you have to see the layers of gouache under magnification to understand how the beauty of his art came into being. The Prints and Photographs Division has now 15.9 million objects in its collection. We've managed to digitize about 1.25 million, and for those things in the public domain, we make them available online via TIFF to anybody, anywhere in the world. For things under copyright protection, we, as the Copyright Repository of the United States, honor that and only make the GIF images available to scholars off-site. Anybody who comes into the buildings of the Library of Congress has full access to the collections. And this includes the work of Arthur Szyk. We have about 40 original works of art on paper by Mr. Szyk, ranging from political cartoons that he did for such magazines, newspapers as PM, original art for Time magazine, and then the beautiful works he created for reproduction, like the Declaration of Independence that was created as a poster for sale. And many of these items, not all of them, came to us through the encouragement of Mr. Ungar, who will be speaking today. He encouraged the donation of many of those works to the library. And I've known Mr. Ungar for a long time. He worked very closely with Harry and Katz and I in 1999 when we mounted a nice small retrospective of the work of Arthur Szyk here at the library. And it was a pleasure of mine to work with the art. It's absolutely stellar. Modern illumination is the only way to describe it. And I've enjoyed the work of Irvin Ungar and his Historicana and his Arthur Szyk Society for many years. And I guess, is it up to me to, or are you going to, okay, so Peggy's going to say a few more words about him, and then.
Thanks so much, Sarah. A noted authority on the Szyk legacy, Irvin Ungar received rabbinic ordination from the Academy for Jewish Religion, a master's degree in education from New York University, and a master's degree in sacred theology from New York Theological Seminary. A former pulpit rabbi, he founded Historicana in 1987, an antiquarian bookstore in Burlingame, California, that specializes in Szyk's work. And as Sarah mentioned, he's also the curator of the Arthur Szyk Society and a frequent lecturer on Szyk and his work. At the conclusion of the program, you're invited to our conference room, and you can go on either side here, to see several pieces of Szyk's Americana from the holdings of the Prints and Photographs Division. And what we say all the time, whether you're in the reading room or any other room, no food or drink is allowed in the conference room. I want to tell you about our exhibit, Words Like Sapphires, 100 Years of Hebraic at the Library of Congress, 1912 to 2012, which is across the hall in the South Gallery, right on the other side of the building. The exhibit of 60-plus items from the Hebraic section opened on October 24th and will be on view until March 16th, 2013. A number of books are from the first gift of 10,000 Hebrew books given to the library by New York philanthropist Jacob H. Schiff in 1912 that had been gathered by book dealer Ephraim Dinard. Photographs of the key players in this and other gifts of Hebraica to the library are also in the exhibit. In addition, there are brand new biblical image playing cards created by Arthur Szyk. The images of biblical figures were created by Szyk in the 1930s, but weren't made available as a set of real playing cards until this year by Historicana. We have 2 more programs coming up, one on November 13th with artist from Israel Domi writer Safer, and on November 19th with artist and calligrapher Deborah Band, who will also be bringing her calligraphed images for her new book, Arise, Arise, Deborah, Ruth, and Hannah. This event is being videotaped for subsequent broadcast on the library's website and other media. The audience is encouraged to offer comments and raise questions during the formal question and answer period, but please be advised that your voice and image may be recorded and later broadcast as part of this event. By participating in the question and answer period, you're consenting to the library's possible reproduction and transmission of your remarks. And now, Irvin Ungar.
Thank you, Peggy. I'm delighted to be here, to be back at the Library of Congress. Let me state at the outset that Arthur Szyk has a long history with the library. In 1933, in late 1933, the very year in which Hitler came to power, Arthur Szyk, who was then living in Poland, was invited to come to the Library of Congress for an exhibition of his art in 1934, in which works on freedom were exhibited. And at the same time, he was presented with the George Washington Bicentennial Medal by the United States Congress. Thus began Arthur Szyk's association with the library. And then again in the year 2000, as Sarah mentioned, an exhibition of Arthur Szyk's art was held here again. It was the first exhibition of the new millennium. It was held in the Swan Gallery, and that exhibition was called Arthur Szyk, Artist for Freedom. So you begin to see that there is a strong connection between Szyk, America, the concept of freedom, and so I've entitled my presentation today, The Fabric of America, through the art of Arthur Szyk. This presentation will examine the fabric of America through the art of Arthur Szyk, an American patriot and defender of democratic ideals. Szyk celebrated the fabric of America while serving as a citizen soldier of the free world, both during and after World War II. As an advocate for humanity based on American values of freedom and justice for all, Szyk and his art demonstrate how and why these values are worth preserving and fighting for. So sections of this presentation will include the cornerstones of American democracy, the guardians of democracy, standing up to tyranny, strengthening alliances and building coalitions, calling upon business as a partner. All of this should be underwritten by ethical teachings and moral instruction. And then after all that, the idea of questioning America and then the fabric of American life. I take credit, good or bad, for having arranged Arthur Szyk's art in this order and making this presentation. The artwork is solely his, and it will speak for itself, but I'll try to add to his visual commentary through my comments. Szyk was a Polish Jew who, in the wake of the Holocaust, immigrated to America in 1940. He celebrated the moral values of liberty, democracy, and peace, while denigrating the social vices of repression, persecution, and tyranny. His purpose was not to please, but to inform, cajole, illuminate, shock, and motivate the lethargic into action. Assessing his own work, Szyk remarked, "Art is not my aim, it is my means." And while reflecting upon the world around him, he affirmed that an artist cannot remain neutral in these times. That quote at the very end was made in 1934 after Hitler again had been in power for about a year and a half, and Szyk was on his visit here to America for a 7-month stay that I had mentioned a few moments ago. And he was interviewed by several newspapers at the time, and Szyk always felt that his responsibility as an artist was to be a fighting artist, an artist who was sort of like a person who was a soldier in art. And of course, looking at the situation in Europe at that time, he believed that an artist cannot remain neutral in these times. As far as our times are concerned, there's art of all kinds, but Szyk himself was always committed to the idea that art had to carry a message with it, and so much of his art was against tyranny and oppression, for justice and freedom, as you will see in the course of the presentation. And now on with the images. I've selected 2 images with which to really begin the presentation. This first one is the United States of America. It was painted by Arthur Szyk in 1945. He was commissioned to create this image. It was going to be reproduced for stamp albums. It was going to be the cover of stamp albums for people who collected United States stamps. And here he tried to create a visual history of America, what he saw as really the fabric of America in 1945. Keep in mind that this is created by a Polish Jewish immigrant who was here only 5 years, as I begin to outline for you what is contained here. First you will see the idea of American invention that is represented at the bottom by the steamboat and locomotive. Then you'll see in the upper left-hand corner the Hoover Dam, and upper right-hand corner, which symbolize for Szyk, American technology. And then you'll see the cities, the 2 vignettes that are in the middle on the sides. The skyscrapers of New York City, and then the Golden Gate Bridge, which represents the growth of America as Szyk saw it in 1945. But he celebrates really in this the people who helped make America strong. You'll see here both the sailor and the soldier toward the bottom center there. But then Szyk also adds here what he sees as the real strength of America, which is its diversity and its pluralism. How so? Because you'll see here that while you'll see toward the bottom on the left and the right, you'll see the white sailor and soldier within the circular vignettes. The same space has been reserved in circular vignettes on the left and the right toward the top for the Native American, whom you see on your right, and on your left you'll see the African American. How many people, how many artists in 1945 were painting images that would demonstrate the integral role or the fabric of American society that would include both the black man and the Native American? This was the immigrant, Arthur Szyk. This was his vision of America as he saw it in 1945. When I speak to students and I show them this piece, I say, this is what Szyk's vision was. If you had to paint the fabric of America today, what would you include in it? Would you agree with Szyk? Would you disagree? And how would you see it? And that's the way in which Szyk's art begins to engage people in dialogue today. And this image here also. This is the Four Freedoms Prayer. You will have the privilege of seeing this original work of art, as Sarah mentioned and Peggy mentioned, in the room behind us following my presentation. Here you see the birth of America. I'm not sure what I just did. Here you see the birth of America represented by the Madonna and Child. And below that, you see the white man, you see also the black man, and you see the Jew. They're all bringing special gifts that are symbolized in the box, which is being held there in gold in the center. The box which shows that these are actually the three wise men who bring gifts to the newborn country. That is the pursuit of happiness, of life, and of liberty. And in framing this scene around the borders, you'll see vertically the freedom of speech, the freedom of religion, freedom from want, and freedom from fear, the four freedoms that Szyk incorporated into this Four Freedoms prayer. On the left, you see the English calligraphy. Szyk always the paintings the images were done by Szyk as well as all of the calligraphy. It wasn't as if, like in medieval times, when someone was working on an illuminated manuscript, that you'd have an artist and a calligrapher. Szyk did both. And here you see the prayer for the nation, which is oftentimes ascribed to Thomas Jefferson, but was not written by Jefferson. Szyk has incorporated this element here. And what you'll also see are the words from the Great Seal toward the bottom, E pluribus unum, out of many one. And then all of this is concluded with words from Lincoln's Gettysburg Address, that the government of the people and for the people, which you'll notice here, shall not perish from the earth. So this is Szyk's integration of text and artwork, and presents an illumination, that is to illuminate the text by virtue of its art. And during his lifetime, many people considered him the greatest illuminator since the 16th century, that is in over 400 years, a man who was creating illuminated manuscripts in Paris in the 1920s and then continued them after he came to America in 1940 right up until the time of his death in 1951, 60 years ago. So the first the first section then are the cornerstones of American democracy. Arthur Szyk loved three countries during his lifetime: Poland, which was the land of his birth; Israel, which he saw as the land of his people; and America, which he saw as the land of his ideals. In 1940, upon his arrival in the United States, Szyk said, "At last, I have found the home that I have always searched for. Here I can speak of what my soul feels. There is no other place on earth that gives one the freedom, the liberty, and the justice that America does." The illuminated Declaration of Independence, completed by Szyk in July of 1950 for the citizens of New Canaan, Connecticut, which he had made his home beginning in 1946. This is the largest of Arthur Szyk's work. You will see this original after the presentation. It's a rare treat to be able to really come in contact with Szyk's art. And so again, thank you, Sarah, for bringing this over. Szyk has taken all of the figures of the American Revolutionary period, illuminated the text around the borders. Here you see almost George Washington, who did not sign the Declaration of Independence, but Szyk makes him, a pivotal, central figure in this illumination, almost welcoming you to read the text. At the very bottom of this work of art, I should say that the original painting was reproduced at the time in 1950. It was distributed widely. Szyk had hoped that every place of government, every school in America would have a copy of his Declaration of Independence, and all of his work was always produced for reproduction. So, but on the bottom of the original painting, which you don't see here because this is a slide from one of the copies of the Declaration, but you will see it on the bottom there. Szyk actually put an inscription at the bottom that he added, in which he wrote, "To my fellow Americans, I dedicate with love this immortal heritage of our forefathers. May these words live in our hearts forever and ever, for no good man loses his freedom but with his life." Arthur Szyk, New Canaan, Connecticut, July 4th, 1950. And on July 4th, 1950, the marching band of the high school in New Canaan, Connecticut, the Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts all lined the streets. On July 4th, 1950, Szyk was welcomed to the dais. They unveiled his Declaration of Independence before 300 people, and Szyk was accorded, being a great citizen, one of the great citizens of America with this Declaration of Independence. After he finished with it, he had decided at that time in 1950 that one day he would like to see that go to the Library of Congress. And he wrote this in a message to his son. As it turned out, in 1999, an anonymous gift was made to the Library of Congress of this Declaration of Independence. And Szyk illuminated the Bill of Rights, which has, here you can see it, many of the symbols of the revolutionary period. The Bold Eagle is here, the Minutemen is here, the Liberty Bell is here. One of the cornerstones of American democracy, the first 10 amendments to the Constitution. And again, the diversity of America is seen in this work of art, Columbia Marches On, painted by Szyk in 1934, actually was for the cover of a yearbook for Columbia Pictures in Hollywood. When Szyk was here during that time, he received many commissions. And again, here you see the great diversity as portrayed by Szyk, and that being part of the cornerstone of American life. And Szyk illuminated the four freedoms as well. I might add that these four freedoms were illuminated before Rockwell painted his four freedoms. Here they are. And now to the guardians of democracy. Who does Szyk see as the heroes of America? And they include George Washington. Szyk loved the American presidents and created an entire series entitled Washington and His Times, 38 illuminations, where Szyk studied the whole history of America even before he had visited the United States, and all of its great heroes are portrayed here. This portfolio was completed by him in Paris in 1930, was printed in 1932. This great work of freedom was printed in Vienna in 1932. I should add that Szyk's other great work of freedom, which was called the Statutes of Kalisz, which dealt for freedom for the Jewish people, was printed in Munich in 1932, two of the great cities of anti-Semitism on the eve of the war break of Hitler coming to power the following year. But now back to Washington in this series. This series of works were actually purchased by the president of Poland and given to Franklin Roosevelt in the mid-1930s. Roosevelt hung this whole portfolio of 38 paintings in the White House, and they were hanging there down the road when he gave his Four Freedoms speech in January of 1941. So a great trivia question for you to ask your friends is, do you know which artist's work were hung at the White House when Roosevelt gave his Four Freedoms speech, 38 paintings on freedom? And the answer would be Arthur Szyk. And he celebrated those heroes: Ben Franklin, the author, inventor, the publisher, statesman, Marquis de Lafayette, the French aristocrat and general during the American Revolution. You have to understand something. You have a man who's living in a Polish Jew who's living in Paris, who's studying the entire history of America and celebrating its ideals. And of course, here in this image, which shows the struggle on Concord Bridge, you see the figure that's in pink in the front. It's a black man. Szyk in 1930 was putting at the center of this drawing a Minuteman and black slave named Prince Easterbrook, who was wounded in the first battle of the American Revolution, which is the Battle of Lexington, which is taking place here. And Szyk has actually featured this figure. More about Szyk's works on behalf of the African American as this presentation continues. But these were part of those 38 works that were hung in Roosevelt's White House. And complementing this Washington and His Time series was this portfolio, I'm only showing one work from it, called the Statutes of Kalisz, the Laws of the Town of Kalisz in Poland, where in the 13th century, that is specifically in 1264, the Polish king Boleslav the Pious granted civil and religious privileges to the Jews of Poland, which were ratified and passed by subsequent Polish kings, including Casimir the Great on 2 occasions. This work of art then was published, dealing with freedom, in Munich in 1932. But this also represents the first use of American images and American symbols in Szyk's art. This work was painted, the original artwork, in 1927 in Paris, and he continued them until it was finally published and reproduced. But down the bottom left, you see an image of Kazimierz Pulaski, a Pole who came to America and served under Washington as the head of the cavalry. And in the bottom right-hand corner, you see one of the financiers of the American Revolution, again, another Pole, this one, Haim Solomon. And so you begin to see also symbols of the American flag and the Polish here accompanying the flag of Poland. And the Szyk's first use of America, again, freedom being a cornerstone of America. Here becomes another one of its heroes. I just mentioned his name, Kazimierz Pulaski. Was Szyk in this artwork, painted in 1938 while he was in London, celebrates the great relationship that Szyk wanted to forge between Poland and America. As you see the flags around the border, all the Polish heroes who contributed to the well-being of America, Pulaski being one of them, another one being Tadeusz Kościuszko. Those from New York will know of the Kościuszko Bridge. Kościuszko became the head of the artillery under Washington, and you can see in the background West Point. The plans for West Point were drawn up by Kościuszko. He's responsible for many of the bridges. One great military figure, and actually Szyk is quite accustomed to taking figures and painted them within battle scenes. Pulaski a moment ago had a battle scene, but he painted Peter the Great and Joan of Arc and Queen Elizabeth, all with battle scenes in the 20th century, 14th century figures he put in the 20th century, so that people who were fighting in the 20th century would look to the heroes of their past and try to emulate them as they set out against their current enemy, in that instance, in the 30s and 40s, during World War II, Nazi Germany. So Szyk was always taking history from the past and bringing it into the present. I mention that because here in Kościuszko, where he was known as a military figure, Szyk does not have any battle scenes. Nothing is here of that. And the question is why? Because Szyk wants to emphasize to us something else. So I want to show you how Szyk's art works in conveying messages. The central part of this image is actually the scroll that Kościuszko is holding in his hand. What is it? It happens to be his last will and testament. Why? Because in it, Kościuszko, who was just returning actually to Europe for the second time and the final time, he wrote his last will and testament for his good friend, Thomas Jefferson, for whom they were very close and had numerous conversations. And in this last will, he states that I want you to take all of the money which I've earned in the service of your country, in the service of America, and I'd like you to, with that money, I'd like you to purchase the emancipation of all of your slaves and to set them free. This is Kościuszko. This is the history that Arthur Szyk knew when, in 1938, he decided to illustrate and to illuminate a text from 1794 and to present it for modern day viewers like ourselves to begin to think about the messages which are eternal. This is an artist who said, "Art is not my aim, it's my means." And here you see other scenes of Jamestown pioneers, again, the early people who settled America as our heroes. And here you see the Zaborowski gentleman who's negotiating with the Indians, who are portrayed as very dignified figures in Szyk's art. And his heroes included, again, American presidents. This one, an illumination of a statement by Thomas Jefferson in a letter that he wrote to Dr. Benjamin Rush in 1800, which is the year Jefferson was running for president, in which Szyk illustrates the text, "I've sworn upon the altar of God eternal hostility against every form of tyranny over the mind of man." This, painted by Szyk in 1951, was one of the last illustrations or illuminations during his lifetime. And Szyk loved Lincoln as well. Here he paints Lincoln with the words of his second inaugural but really it's within the context of World War II. For you'll notice at the very bottom, you'll see 3 veterans representing the 3 different armed services branches during World War II, returning from battle. And Szyk uses the text from Lincoln's 1860s period, and he writes here, with malice toward none, with charity for all, with firmness in the right, as God gives us to see the right, let us strive on to finish the work that we are in, to bind up the nation's wounds, to care for him who shall have borne the battle, and for his widow and his orphan, to do all which may achieve and cherish a just and lasting peace among ourselves and with all nations. Szyk took these words from the 1860s and he placed them within the hearts of the people of America following World War II. And this is the way in which Szyk used history and used his art to convey those eternal messages of peace. And Franklin Roosevelt, this work was completed, and then he dedicated it to FDR and then gave it to Eleanor Roosevelt, who used to write about Arthur Szyk in her columns, and he signs his name, FDR's Soldier in Art. That is how Arthur Szyk saw himself in the 1940s, as, in my opinion, he then went on to become the leading anti-Nazi artist in America during World War II. And here, this is Francis Perkins. I've been walking the streets of Washington, D.C. I saw the Department of Labor building and the name Francis Perkins on the outside. The first woman appointed to be in a cabinet of an American president. FDR appointed her, and Szyk painted her portrait, which appeared in Fortune magazine in the 1940s. Actually, it appeared there. A hero of America. And again, the workers of America are its heroes. Here, Szyk, on a Labor Day issue, tries to motivate Americans to work to fight the Nazi serpent who is strangling the pillars of democracy on the side. While Norman Rockwell was illustrating the covers of the Saturday Evening Post during the war years, Szyk was illustrating the covers of Collier's magazine. How widely circulated was Collier's? Well, I'll tell you that the Saturday Evening Post had a circulation of 3 million. Collier's had a circulation of 2.5 million. Everyone was seeing Arthur Szyk's art during World War II. It was virtually everywhere. Newspapers, magazines, covers. And I should add that after the bombing of Pearl Harbor, whose work of art was shown on the cover of Time magazine? Arthur Szyk, showing Admiral Yamamoto as the aggressor. That original work of art is in the collection of the Library of Congress. And so a little bit more now about the life of Arthur Szyk through newspaper clippings. When he came to America in 1940, articles were published that shows that Hitler had placed a personal price tag on his head. So powerful was his anti-Nazi caricatures and cartoons that were appearing in newspapers in London, where he had moved in 1937 from Poland with his wife and daughter to actually supervise the printing of his great book on freedom, The Passover Haggadah. And he was in London from 1937 to 1940, when in 1940, with the support of the British government and the Polish government in exile that had relocated to London, Szyk then came to America to help bring the face of the war in Europe to the Western world. And hence newspapers carried articles about his arrival or presentations that he was making. He first went to Canada, then to the US. It was very difficult for someone from Poland to come into the US in 1940, so he spent numerous months in Canada, where the Canadian people embraced him and he embraced them. This is a clipping that appeared in the Halifax Herald, that famed Polish artist has a price on his head. And then when he came into the United States, quite rapidly, Szyk's cartoons of Axis were in great demand by the soldiers in the United States. Here, another clipping, the USO gets Szyk cartoons. Centers were featuring his art. And if you look at line 4 there in the large type, you may not be able to see it, but it shows that his art is to be exhibited, colored reproductions of his anti-Axis cartoons in over 500 Army recreation centers, 500 USO bases Every GI who was going overseas was seeing his art. In fact, there was an Esquire magazine survey that said that his art was more popular with the men who were serving in the armed forces than were pinups. That's how widely known Szyk's art was and was seen by the soldiers. His paintings were being exhibited at airfields, at army bases, and which also Szyk was being declared a citizen soldier of the free world. And here he is standing up to tyranny through his art. Here you see a self-portrait. Hitler is being pinned to the table, trying to get away. Szyk is trashing in the garbage can. Some of the Axis leaders, the Vichy French here, Laval, Pétain, Mussolini are in the garbage can. Himmler at the very bottom is under a sheet of paper. Goering on top of him, and Goebbels with the microphone, the propaganda minister, is doing a play-by-play. This was the frontispiece in Szyk's book called Ink and Blood that was published in 1946 after the war was over as a peace book, a response to Germany, Bismarck, and militarism, its concept of blood and iron. Szyk's response was ink and blood, that is, through the pen, which will become like his sword, the brush, which will become like its ally in his fight against Nazism, National Socialism, and terror. I was walking down the street, as I mentioned the other day, and I saw outside the museum. Some of you have been to it. I had a fabulous visit there, and there's an exhibit there that's being called Blood and Iron, or Blood and Ink, actually. Blood and Ink, and I then saw Szyk had flipped that around to Ink and Blood. I wonder where they got the title from. Any case, The New Order was the first anti-Nazi book of its kind published in America. Szyk attacking the Nazi New Order. This was published in 1941 in July, 5 months before the United States entered the war, calling attention to what was going on in Europe. And then, of course, again, another cover from Collier's. A few moments ago, I showed you the Arsenal of Democracy, where America was building tanks and the Nazi serpent was going around the Pillar of Democracy. This is another cover. See, Szyk's artwork was not made to make anyone feel comfortable. It wasn't meant to be put over sofas or to be matched with the wallpaper. It was meant to agitate, to cajole you to action and to respond in some very deep, visceral level. Here you see Hitler holding up in one hand Mein Kampf, and over the other shoulder is the devil, while the whole world is below him. And Szyk wanted America to feel this very, very deeply. The whole idea that here is a madman's dream. Hitler sitting on the throne. At his feet will be at his side will be his accomplices, his cronies. At his feet will rest on the Untermensch, the subhuman, the Jew. This is Hitler's dream. This is a madman's dream. And on the right, Uncle Sam and John Bull are in chains. This work of art was completed by Szyk and published in Coronet magazine before the United States entered the war. Szyk wanted to call attention to what Hitler had in store for the free world and America, hence this work of art. And he said to America, if you don't pay attention, this is what's going to happen. This will be another madman's dream. And this work of art was published in the American Mercury, which had been started, way in its early days by Mencken, not such a friend of the Jewish people. He was dead at this time, and Szyk had numerous artworks published in the American Mercury, again calling attention to the war effort, the whole idea of standing up for freedom. Here's the cover of Time that I mentioned earlier, showing Admiral Yamamoto as the aggressor. Satan leads the ball. Here you find the devil who's in front, leading this parade of its followers, which includes in the very center, it's hard, I can't have a pointer here, but you'll see Hitler in the center. Around him, around his shoulder, is German industry. Szyk wants to show all the participants of evil. At the far left, you'll see a woman in the upper left-hand corner. This is Brunhilde of the Wagnerian operas, who represents old Germany and militarism. In the bottom left-hand corner, you'll find Mussolini, who doesn't have any pants on. Szyk sort of went to town on Mussolini, saw him as a bungling idiot, and showing him here without any pants. Where the first figure behind the devil there on the far right is the Japanese, who Szyk saw himself as very, very racist, of course, responsible for who knows how many deaths of Chinese, 20 million, 30 million, who knows how many over those years of their racist policies. Szyk calling attention to them in this image, holding a sword that on it, you can't see the writing, but it says Mitsubishi. These are all the characters that Szyk sawing as dancing at Satan's ball. And again, another work of art, De Profundis, out of the depths. Szyk's calling attention to what's going on to the victims in Europe. Here are the Jewish people, where they're pointing up the finger to Cain. Where is Abel thy brother? You know, in the biblical narrative, the first two brothers in the Bible, already there's a murder. One brother kills the next. Cain, God speaks, where is your brother Abel? While the Jews, the lifeless and dying Jews, are pointing to who's responsible for this? Who can come to take credit or responsibility for what's unfolding in Europe? And then Szyk paints in the left-hand corner, upper left-hand corner, Jesus holding the Ten Commandments, as if to say, were Jesus alive in 1942-43, when Szyk painted this, he too would have been killed as a Jew. And so this work was designed it appeared full page in the Chicago Sun in April of 1943. Huge, like this. This was the width of it, and it was on a page this tall, and it was not sponsored by any Jewish group to call attention. It was actually sponsored by a Christian textbook commission, in which the textbook commission of Protestants at that time said that we have to look at what we've been teaching about the Jewish people over the centuries. We have to take responsibility for this and participate in making sure this is taken care of. And they saw this as not only anti-Semitic, what had unfolded, not only anti-American, but the teachings as anti-Christian themselves, and Szyk's artwork was used as this appeared, again, full page in the Chicago Sun in 1943. This is the way Szyk's artwork was used. One of the things I'm really emphasizing here in my talk is pretty clear, is what the messages were. Do not overlook that this is great art. It is great art. Now, I'm not an art historian. I'm a Szyk advocate. I'm a passionate guy about this stuff. But when you look at the original artwork and you see it, it's great art. And this original painting is only this size. And he worked only watercolor and gouache, pen and ink, colored pencil, never in oils, never on canvas. Miniaturist. The other heroes, a Pole, who at Szyk's caption at the bottom, Father, do not forgive them, for they know what they do. Here's a soldier who's holding lifeless Poles in his hand. Szyk taking almost that statement from the New Testament and flipping it on its head. And these again are the heroes, the Kellys and Cones, who are fighting together, whom Szyk illustrated. This again appeared in a newspaper, in the New York Post. I should add that in 1943 to 1944, over an 11-month period, over 100 works of Szyk appeared just in the New York Post alone. Oh God, I got to speed up my talk here. These are the Kellys and Cones. Goebbels, if we don't destroy that team, we're doomed. These are Szyk's words. And again, for the Jewish war veterans, Szyk would put Jew and Gentile side by side as he created a lot of artwork for them during World War II. And the whole idea that blacks and whites and Jews should all serve together, during World War II we had segregated units. For Szyk, he thought that the great strength of America was its great unity. And here they are, he's showing you the white man, the black man, and the Jew all united in common cause, with the idea that Szyk had hoped that after the Moscow conference in October of 1943, he saw and he felt that ultimately Hitler would be hanging by a rope. There is Szyk in a fighting stance almost in the bottom left-hand corner, showing himself as a soldier in art. Now, for Szyk, there were also enemies of another kind. And here you'll see some of them. Cancer was an enemy of another kind, and so he designed artwork for bookmarkers to fight cancer. Or he created artwork on behalf of the Red Cross. Or he created artwork to fight venereal disease, a disease of another kind. These were made into posters and hung in the barracks of soldiers who were overseas, where he's equated Hitler to syphilis and the Japanese to chancroid and the Italians to gonorrhea. And this was produced by a pharmaceutical company in Philadelphia, the Wyeth Company. There were 2 of these posters that were reproduced. A disease of another kind. And racism is a disease of another kind that has to be eradicated. Again, in World War II, whites and blacks didn't fight side by side, segregated units. Szyk created this artwork, which shows a white GI and a black GI walking together. And the caption on the bottom, the white GI says to the black GI, "Tell me, what would you do with Hitler?" And the black GI responds, "I would make him a Negro, and I would drop him somewhere in the USA." That's how bad racism was. And Szyk, while he was fighting the enemy abroad and its racism, was not afraid. He removed his blinders and looked about him, saying, we're fighting an enemy abroad, let's deal with business at home as well. And here, another image, which was published in America in 1949, after the war's over. Szyk again attacking racism. Here, the Ku Klux Klan stands behind a black soldier who's wearing a Purple Heart, who's returned from the war years. His arms are bound behind him. He's tied in rope. And at the very top, Szyk again uses the same statement, "Do not forgive them, O Lord, for they do know what they do." And it was published in an American newspaper in New York. And again, De Profundis, I referred to earlier, another disease, a disease of another kind that Szyk fought against was anti-Semitism. And isolationism, as those who called for America not getting involved in World War II. Szyk created a great deal of artworks that were directed against Lindbergh, against the American First Movement, Senator Nye, and all of the cast of characters. So how do we deal with all this? Strengthening alliances and building coalitions. Szyk was invited as the artist to go to the League of Nations and to illuminate its charter. And he was invited by the United Nations to create artwork, and here are some bookmarks of his shielding off evil. And this illumination, brilliant, tying together the people of Poland and the people of Canada, that what happened to the children of Poland should not happen to the children of Canada when Szyk arrived there in 1940. His portrait's in the bottom right-hand corner where you can see him holding a palette. And then again, building coalitions, building alliances. Szyk supported the British war relief effort. This is a letter of thanks to them for his donating works on their behalf. Or from the Paderewski Testimonial Fund, where he raised money for Poles, not Jews, but Poles during World War II. Or that he donated artwork and raised money for Greece. Or from the Czechs during World War II, or from the Chinese that he donated $50 out of his pocket in 1941. $50 is a lot of money to give at that time. The whole idea was that here was a person who was a Polish Jew who cared deeply about rescuing European Jewry during the war years, and yet used his value system to fight against tyranny and oppression, to be an advocate for humanity at large. And here you see the words of thanks that are coming to him for his efforts on behalf of humanity. And here again, poster seals or seals that were sort of used like Easter seals, here to raise money and support for the soldiers from Australia and New Zealand. And then the whole idea of calling upon big business as a partner in America and its democracy to make it work. Szyk's artwork appeared on telephone directories in Manhattan during the war years, here in 1945. Or his artwork was used by U.S. Steel to advocate for the war cause. I mean, so there were ways of using business and using it to participate in the freedoms and democracies of America, and Szyk and the big business exploited each other. I shouldn't say they exploited each other, they actually worked together to help fight against a common enemy. His artwork was created for Coca-Cola. Shalom Aleichem, peace, bring peace in the Holy Land, not only in English, but also appeared in Polish. Can you imagine Poles reading this, trying to bring peace during those years? I mean, it's hard enough when you read English to try to bring peace, let alone people in a foreign country, but Szyk's artwork was used for that purpose. Or Columbia Pictures, this was the cover for its yearbook, that is, that Hollywood has a role to play as part of big business. Or other, manufacturing companies or retail businesses. Szyk's artwork was, we should have invested in U.S. war bonds, Szyk has the Nazi figures saying. Or we should buy more war bonds and help prevent this great robbery and looting of democracy. Again, Szyk's artwork used. Or here for Young and Rubicam, an advertising firm. Doesn't this have a slight odor of Goebbels? And here is the skunk. Szyk actually did a fabulous piece of Hirohito with a skunk along the way, and the skunk is saying, "Don't call me a skunk when he's around." So Szyk oftentimes used those motifs in his art, again, for Philco. His art was everywhere. General Motors, then Casco, and Casualty Insurance. His art was in Life and Look and every magazine in terms of the publicizing of causes during the war years. And yet all of this has to be underwritten by ethical teachings and moral instructions. Not enough to throw money at something to take care of issues or to take care of problems. And while Szyk wasn't connecting the two, and I'm sort of taking my own license to connect all those, I'm taking some of his artwork which is directed towards those values that come out of religious value systems or out of philosophies. Here is the Jewish sage Hillel, who said, if I'm not for myself, who will be for me? And you should love your neighbor as yourself. The whole idea of standing up and using the Judeo tradition or the Judeo-Christian tradition for those who wish to fight against oppression. Or the statements that are given by other writers throughout time, the Victorian writer Ruskin, who talks about the meaning of education and does not mean teaching people what they do not know, it means teaching them to behave as they do not behave. The whole idea of thrusting greatness upon us, but we can live in the company of the great through our minds and through our reading and through our aspirations. The whole idea of how to use education, or Lord Balfour, who was the foreign minister for England, who also was responsible for the Balfour Declaration in declaring in 1917 an independent Jewish state, who said that the best thing that you can give to your enemy is forgiveness, to an opponent tolerance, and to a friend your heart, and so on. And each one of these are illuminated, these ideals are illuminated by Szyk. These were all part of covers, inside front covers that Szyk created for Coronet magazine. In fact, 23 of his paintings appeared on the inside front covers of Coronet in the 1930s. Or the idea of Lamb, a writer, 18th, 19th century British writer. The greatest pleasure in life is to do a good deed in secret and have it discovered by accident. And the whole idea of the unity of mankind, this was designed as a Christmas card by Szyk, the whole idea of peace on earth and goodwill to men. It was never reproduced, but this was his artwork, and that was his intent. Or that of Confucius, the Chinese sage philosopher who lived 2,500 years ago, with righteousness in the heart, there will be beauty in the character, and so on. So I'm only giving you part of these. Your job is to go read the rest of them at some point. And all of this, despite everything that Szyk stood for, everything that he represented, illustrating and illuminating the Declaration of Independence, the Bill of Rights, and the Four Freedoms, in the late 1940s, Arthur Szyk found him investigated by the House on Un-American Activities. At that time, this is a newspaper clipping after he died, in which McCarthyism is denounced as a contagion of fear. It shows Arthur Szyk's wife, Julia, with Eleanor Roosevelt, dealing with this issue of McCarthyism. But in 1949, this pamphlet was issued in which Szyk was named as a member of 9 subversive organizations in America, along with Albert Einstein and others. The list is too long to name those who were wrongly and falsely accused. Szyk, of course, was not a communist. In fact, at this time in 1949 is when he painted the Four Freedoms Prayer, in 1950 the Bill of Rights, and in 1950 the Declaration of Independence of America. Lest I conclude on this note, I want to show you one more piece, which is my concluding slide. And it is, by the way, this is where Szyk's name is mentioned, too hard for you to see the arrow. It is the fabric of American life. And I think that when you look at all of this and you look at the messages that Szyk hoped to deliver, he was really dealing with the best of what America has to offer. But the idea is you need to be vigilant. You need to stand up. You need to be one who takes a stand. You don't worry about what anyone else says. You do what you think is right. And right has has in Szyk's mind the idea that freedom, justice, not just for one people, but for all people, where not everyone is free, no one is free. And so the whole idea here for Szyk was that there is a fabric of American life. This is a statement, this being election day, this was a statement that was made by Wendell Willkie, who in 1940 was the Republican nominee for president, was running against Roosevelt. This is a statement that Szyk has chosen to illuminate, which I think captures the great fabric of America. When Szyk has illuminated these words, our way of living together in America is a strong but delicate fabric. It's made up of many threads. It has been woven over many centuries by the patience and sacrifice of countless liberty-loving men and women. It serves as a cloak for the protection of the poor and the rich, of the black and the white, of Jew and Gentile, of foreign and native born. Let us not tear it asunder, for no man knows that once it is destroyed, where or when man will find its protective warmth again. Thank you very much. I left 1 minute for questions. Sorry.
Thank you so much. Images that I had never, ever seen before and didn't even know about. So let's take one or two questions, and then I want to give you the opportunity to go in the back and to see these actual items up close. Yes. And you may have to repeat the question.
Okay, sure. Yeah, hi. How did Szyk's interest, I'll repeat the question. How did Szyk's interest in America arise? So what's the first evidence that one has of Szyk's interest in America, in its ideals? It is said that when Szyk was 6 years old, a Jew in Poland was already doing drawings of the Boxer Rebellion in China. Arthur Szyk. Szyk, as a 6-year-old, was doing drawings of the Boxer Rebellion in China while being a 6-year-old in Poland. Where does that come from? Where does the idea that when he is 12 and 13 years old and he's being sent off and he arrives in 1910 as a 15-year-old in Paris to study in one of the academies with Diego Rivera and others at the Académie Julienne, where over a 3-year period he attended only 12 classes? Where is it that he then decided he was going to do drawings about the ills of society, send them back to Poland, and they'd be published in the Polish press about his critiquing society? Where does all this come from? Where does this great vast knowledge of history come from? Where does it all come from? I know where he learned about America. He used to go to the great libraries that were in Paris in the 1920s, where he was for a dozen years, and he would pore over books there. And he would study. And look, he did 51 paintings on Simón Bolívar and South America. From 1929 to 1950, he completed 51 paintings of Bolívar, whom he saw as the George Washington of South America. Where does a guy have time to learn all this? And plus that, he did the whole history of Liberia and of Newfoundland, if it has a real Nova Scotia. He just knew about everything. More on that subject. But America and its ideals was at the core of Szyk. Was at his core. I did everything but answer your question. Okay, so I think. Well, let me. I don't want to skip over this, but Szyk was really interested in nationalism. He studied all of Polish painting, Polish nationalist painters of the 19th century. He studied everything he could get his hands on. He saw America as the land of his ideals. This question is to be continued. I want to give, either we're going to conclude or take one more question, because I know the time frame for people is very short. But I'll be around afterwards.
Right back there.
As an art historian, I'm very interested in the visual culture of Szyk, because I saw a lot of very different styles. It's like a lot of Dürer, a lot of William Morris art and crafts, a lot of Arthur
German Expressionism is here. He would have Polish and Slavic folk art.
And Dumier, a lot of. So this is very hybrid. Which kind of visual culture he has?
Yes, is his art, I don't know how to ask the question, but it's a combination of visual culture that Szyk integrated, synthesized, and came up with his own style. If you ever see Arthur Szyk's art again, you're never going to confuse him with anyone else. He integrates this art and assimilates it, creates his style, but for sure, he was aware of every art style, ranging from the Renaissance to German Expressionism, as I mentioned, Polish and Slavic folk art, the art of Palestine and Bezalel school. Szyk knew them all. He was well versed. And there's been a few articles. There's more that's being written now about Arthur Szyk. When I first got interested in his art, which was about 15 years ago, there were no books written about Arthur Szyk. Now there's a dozen or more. A couple of movies have been made. Exhibitions have been held worldwide and continue to be. So there's this whole, let me just use the word, renaissance of interest in Szyk. I'm part of that, but the banner has to be picked up also by art historians and scholars who are willing to sit down and really begin to take a look at Szyk's art. Because I've read too many books on Jewish art that have missed Arthur Szyk's name. I've read too many books about political caricature and cartooning during World War II, and Szyk's name isn't there. And how is that possible? How is it possible that someone who created this great body of work is almost totally absent from the lips of curators and museum directors throughout the United States? He was decorated in France during the war years, and he was decorated in Poland and in America, and was friend to many, not only those who were the soldiers who were carrying his, but the people who were the kings and princes and leaders of countries of the world. So I don't have time to answer your question, but you can see me privately, and I'll give you my ideas about why I think Szyk was forgotten. But knowing that time is of the essence too, I'm sort of going to turn it over to Peggy now.
Thank you very much. That was really wonderful today. Wonderful. Good afternoon. Today is Thursday, November 8th, 2012, here at the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C. My name is Peggy Pearlstein. I'm head of the Hebraic section in the African Middle Eastern Division, and I'm standing in the middle of our new exhibit, Words Like Sapphires, 100 Years of Hebraica at the Library of Congress, 1912 to 2012. We're celebrating the first gift of Hebraica to the library, given in 1912, 10,000 Hebrew books gathered by Ephraim Dinard and given to the library by philanthropist Jacob H. Schiff. Today I'd like to introduce you to Irvin Ungar, who's standing right here, who will be talking about the Szyk playing cards that are in the exhibit. Irvin Ungar is the founder of Historicana, which deals with Szyk materials and other Judaica materials. He's also the curator of the Arthur Szyk Society. And we're very excited that he's here with us today to be able to talk about the brand new Szyk playing cards. Thank you.
Thank you, Peggy. I'm delighted to introduce you to the playing card art of Arthur Szyk. Szyk was a Polish Jew born in Łódź, Poland in 1894, came to the United States in 1940, and died in New Canaan, Connecticut in 1951, over 60 years ago. In 1933, in the year that Hitler came to power, Arthur Szyk was invited to the United States for exhibitions right here at the Library of Congress to show his works on freedom. After 7 months, he returned to his hometown in Łódź, Poland, and with Hitler in power now almost a year and a half, Arthur Szyk set out to create his Passover Haggadah, which was a response to the tyranny and threat of Nazi Germany at that time, in which he thought Jews should be more heroic and be willing to stand up to an attempt to annihilate them in this generation. At the same time that Szyk was creating his Passover Haggadah between 1934 and 1936, he also illustrated playing card art. That is, where the kings in the playing cards would be the kings of ancient Israel: Saul, David, Solomon, and Hezekiah, the less known Hezekiah. And Szyk would paint the clubs, hearts, diamonds, and spades on each one of these figures. The queens would be the heroic women of ancient Israel. Of course, there's only one Queen Esther, but Ruth, Deborah, and Judith were the other heroic figures who became Arthur Szyk's queens. I'm holding here Queen Esther. Esther, of course, the only woman here that's a queen, but Szyk found heroic women. There was no shortage of them in biblical times, but he wished to emphasize them, each one of them with great courage. Deborah, I might add, is holding the scales because she was a judge, and so the scales represented justice, whereas Esther's holding the scepter as the queen. Here you see over here Esther in Hebrew. Here you see the spade for the Queen of Spades. It's said that she took off the head of Holofernes when she wiggled her way into his tent and took off his head with his own sword. So of course here Judith is found holding the sword, and she has the club here as well. Ruth, at one time the Moabitess who married one of the sons of Naomi, and after her husband died and Naomi returned to the land of Israel, Ruth said to her that she will go with her, that your people will be my people, your God, my God. And so when she returned to the land of Israel, she went to work for a man named Boaz and was in the fields and gleaned the fields. So hence Szyk has painted her here with the wheat, and her Hebrew name is here Ruth. She's the Queen of Hearts. And of course, Ruth then married Boaz, and so she has two rings, which differentiates her from all the other women. And of course, all the other women have dark hair. Szyk, knowing that Ruth was a convert to Judaism, actually painted her with blonde hair and blue eyes. And the Jacks became the warriors for Arthur Szyk, the most familiar of them, Judah Maccabee and Bar Kokhba. As part of the playing card project, which I hope to bring to the public, I actually commissioned the writing of a book about the playing card art, as well as a portfolio suite of images that one could frame. Hence, here in the case, you will see King David as the King of Clubs. You'll see here also Deborah as the Queen of Diamonds. There's an entire portfolio of 12 individual prints, a book about the playing card art, as well as the decks of cards. There are two decks. One is the player's deck, in which the kings, queens, and jacks are reversible, as well as the collector's deck, which is a full image of each of the heroes. This project then was completed about a year ago, and we are delighted that the Library of Congress has chosen to exhibit these heroic figures as an example of the way in which Szyk used his art to call attention to themes and deliver messages through his artwork.
This has been a presentation of the Library of Congress. Visit us at loc.gov.